Everybody, welcome back to Saturday morning, quarantine Saturday morning. We're going to do some art stuff today. I'm Luke McNeil from McNeil Media Group. Today we're going to play around with Adobe Lightroom some, edit some photos, and then after that, after we get sick of messing around in Lightroom, we're going to swap over into Photoshop and do some cool dispersion effect photo manipulations. So it's fun. There's a few things I want to go over before we get started. Obviously, this is a live recording. If anything happens during the course of the recording, if we get disconnected or we have technical issues, I'm just going to keep going with the presentation, and then after it's done, I'll release the video because it's also being recorded separately. So that's going to be recorded. We'll have that, and I'll put that on my YouTube channel. If you want to see this or any of the other events that we've done or that I've done, you can see them on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Luke McNeil. Now, this workshop's a little different because I'm providing you with the files that we're going to use so that you can follow along at home. You'll find in the show notes here and on my Facebook page a link to a Dropbox. In that Dropbox, I've posted all the images that we're going to work on today, as well as I put a plugin for Photoshop in there that we might use later on. I just wanted to put it there so you don't have to go hunting for it, right? So there's a copy of the Pexels plugin, which is a stock photography plugin for Photoshop in that Dropbox folder, and you're welcome to use that or not. But it's a very, very good plugin. Great. So let's... there's one other thing I wanted to mention. That is, we're going to be using Adobe Lightroom and Adobe Photoshop and potentially Affinity Photo today. But it doesn't really matter what you're using to edit your photos because there's a lot of different photo software out there. It all pretty much does the same thing. Each software suite or package has its own strengths and weaknesses. So you can follow along with this and just watch the concepts, right? Shadows and highlights are shadows and highlights, whether you're in Adobe Photoshop or Final Cut Pro or Capture One or whatever, right? So the concepts all apply no matter what graphic tool you're using. With that said, let's get started. I'm gonna swap over to my desktop here. Not bad, huh? It's a pretty decent desktop. Let's hide me and bust open. I'm just gonna close it so you'll see it open the way that it opens from scratch. So here's Adobe Lightroom. I have it down here. It's this little rounded quarter Lightroom. Note with Adobe Creative Cloud, there's two versions of Lightroom. One of them has a square icon. Like if you look at this icon down here, I know it's really small, but it's a Lightroom, and the corners of the square around it are kind of rounded. That means that it's Lightroom CC, the newer cloud version of Lightroom. There's also a classic version of Lightroom that may look a little different than what I'm about to show you, but it does all the same stuff, so don't worry about it. So I'm going to open up Adobe Lightroom CC, that's what they call it. And it'll open up to my photo library here, which has all my photos in it. It's me playing around in front of a green screen and then some stuff, some other stuff. Anyway, here's my main photo library. It's got all my photos. You see it, 22,000 of them in there. Really needs to get cleaned out bad. And here's all my albums. So this is how I've organized my photos. So I have a folder here for my client shoots and for events, other stuff for people. Like if I was just looking for Jen, my wife, for example, she has her own folder, so I can click here and find all my pictures of Jen. I have way more than 300 pictures of Jen, by the way. So this is how your photos get organized in Lightroom Classic. So for our purposes, I've selected a handful of photos for us to play with today, and I put them on Dropbox. If you're looking for these files, I've placed the link to it in the show notes for this video. So let's find my Dropbox here. I got too many Dropboxes. BVAA. Here we go. So what we have in this folder here, I've got 3 digital negatives, DNG files. So these are raw format files. And then I have 2 JPEGs here that I grabbed from a stock image site that we're going to use for some photo manipulation. And then here's the plugin that I was mentioning in the intro here for pixels if you want to install that in Photoshop. There's one for Mac and one for Windows. Just choose the one that fits you. So to get started here, I'm gonna create a new album for this workshop. So I'm gonna come down here in Adobe Lightroom. Let me make this a little bit bigger so hopefully you can see it better. Let's come down here and all right, you see next to these little view options here, this is just making the thumbnails visible or not next to my events to save space. You can pick the one you like. But next to that, there's a little plus sign. This is to create a new album or a folder of albums. And I'm going to create a new folder just to keep this organized. And I recommend that you do the same. So I'm going to come over here to albums and click on this little plus button. And you'll see you could either create a folder or create an album. I'm going to create an album. An album's for pictures to go in, a folder's for other albums to go in. Right? So you have a hierarchy there. Let's create an album, and I'll call it BVAA. And then what's today, the 25th? 0425. Excellent. So I'm going to tell it that I'm going to uncheck these boxes here, right? Because it's asking if I want to include any selected photos. I don't have any photos selected right now, other than this one up here by default. So I don't want to include that in the album. And I don't want it to be inside my folder client shoots because this is not a client shoot. So I'm going to uncheck both of those and hit create. So this makes us a new album here for us to put some photos in. Awesome. So hopefully you've been able to follow along, or you know where I'm at, and you get a folder here in Lightroom named something that you can understand. And you've got the Dropbox link that is in the show notes with these 3 photos, right? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to take these 3 raw files, 1, 2, and 3, and I'm going to drag them from my my Windows Explorer here over to my new folder, right? And that's going to bring up the Adobe import dialog here. So it shows me our 3 photos, and it says we're going to add those to the album, the one we just created, right? That's BVAA 0425. But if I wanted to change that, I could either create a new album right from here or put it in one of my existing albums. But that's correct. We want it to go there. And then I'll just say add 3 photos. And then boom, it's going to import those 3 photos into Adobe Lightroom. And beautiful. So this is what we want. Now, what we've got here is a road type situation from the Southwest. Here's a picture of the Grand Canyon that you can barely see. And then here's a picture of Zoe, a model from New England that works with us a lot. And maybe we can see about bringing out some more detail from that photo. First, let's select the one in the middle here, because this was really our first photo. It's the one with the road and the little mountainy thing. Let's just open that up and take a look at what we're working with. We can close these other windows. We don't need them anymore. Awesome. Great. So the first thing I'm going to do as I work on this photo is assess what's going on in the picture. So what is it that I like about this picture? Those are the things I'm going to want to try and bring out with my edits. The things that I like are the colors. I like that there's a lot of reds and pinks. I don't know if it's bouncing off here onto the clouds or whatever, but in the clouds there's some nice color. And I like the red. And I like this line that leads you into the center of the photo. And all these are great things. So I'm going to try and focus on bringing those out. What are some things we don't like about the photo? Well, it's kind of dark. All around it's kind of dark. In the foreground here, we can't see much detail at all in these little bushes. There's not much color going on. We just need to brighten up the foreground. Maybe we can bring some more depth or life back to the sky and the clouds, because those are looking a little flat. Let's see what else is going on in this photo. Let's start by, because it's bothering me, let's start by brightening up this foreground. And by foreground, I mean the part in the front of the picture. Right? The foreground is in the front and the background is in the back. So the foreground of the picture is all the stuff that leads your eye into the picture. Great. So here we go. what I want to do is take this tool right here. It's called the linear gradient tool. And we're going to select this. You can either select it with your mouse or hit the keyboard command L. And if you hover over any of these tools in Lightroom, it'll show you the keyboard command that you could press. So we're going to hit linear gradient, and nothing happens, but that's all right. It turns our cursor into a little crosshairs. And I'm going to drag from the bottom all the way up, and you can see this little accordion thing kind of happening and moving around as I move my mouse. And I want to just pull this up maybe to about here. Right? And you still see it didn't do anything because none of these sliders have been adjusted yet. So right now we have an adjustment here. If I hover over that, you can see the red area is where it's going to affect. So you'll notice that it's only affecting the darker foreground portion of the picture that we want to brighten up. That's exactly what we want. So Lightroom gives us a tool to do that. Now that we've got it selected, let's grab this exposure slider right here. And the exposure is just going to bring up the whole exposure evenly across the image. Right. So see what's happening as I pull this all the way up and all the way down. See what's happening to our selected area. Let's pull this up just a little bit, like maybe 1. I'm gonna bump it by exactly 1. So I just want to type it in instead of fiddling with my mouse. I'm just gonna click in here and type in 1, and that brings up the exposure quite a bit. So now I'm gonna click off of that tool. I'm just gonna click up here onto another set of tools, right? And I'll use my backslash key. The backslash key on my keyboard is the key control for Lightroom to show the before and after. So if I hit backslash, it shows us the original image, and then here's our edit. So already it's starting to look a little bit better. What's next? Let's see about bringing out a little bit more detail in this area over here. This kind of ruin. It's pretty neat. It's small when it's zoomed out like this. You can't really tell what it is. Let's see if we can brighten that bit up a little bit. So for this one, because it's kind of oval shaped, I'm going to grab my radial gradient filter. This does essentially the same thing as that last one we used, except when I draw my area, it draws a circle or an ellipse. And that's very helpful to grab an area like this. So I don't want that much of the road in it, really, if I can help it. So I'm trying to keep the road out as much as I can. But I want it to look natural, so let's see what happens. So here we've got this area selected. Let's bump up the exposure a bit, see what's happening if I take it way too far. So I'm going to take it a little too far so I can see what it's doing, right? So now when I bump this exposure up, this obviously does not look good, but that's all right. I just want to be able to see my change. So I want to make sure that it's kind of evenly lighting this area, and then I'll pull it back down to the point where you can't tell that it's there. It's just kind of giving a little bit extra light. That's my plan. All right. So instead of bumping it up by 2, maybe we bump it up by 1. Right. That looks pretty natural, and now it's kind of in line with the rest of the photo. I'm going to click off of that tool, right? So now I don't have a tool selected, and then I'm going to use the backslash key. Let's look at our before and after. Awesome. This is cool. All right, so the brightness part is pretty much taken care of, I think. Let's focus a little on the sky. In this example, I'm going to use here another linear gradient like we did over here in the foreground, except I'm going to do it on the sky, and I'm going to pull it down from the top to the bottom. I'm going to make sure I'm on the right tool. And then I will pull this down from the top to the bottom, and you see our little accordion thing. And I only want it to cover the sky. So one little thing that might be helpful is when you have one of these adjustments in Lightroom, it doesn't always have the red overlays to show you what you've selected by default. If you want to show those or hide those overlays, you can use the O key on your keyboard, O for overlay. And when I hit O, you can see that that red overlay shows up, so I can really make sure that my filter is where I want it to be, right? And I can adjust it with the red filter on, so I can see what it's touching. Right? And we just want the sky, like so. Cool, 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 cool. Now we've got that selected. I'm going to hit the O key to get rid of the red because it's getting in my way. And then one of the most common things that I do to a sky, especially when you have the blown outness, the white sky here, is to pull the highlights down. It's just to make the brights a little less bright. And when you do that, see what happens when I adjust the brightness. I'm calling it brightness, but this is the highlights slider. Turn it down. And it brings out all the detail here in the clouds and some more color. So let's take a look at our before and after. Before, here we are. Now here we are. It's a big difference. That's very cool. This is annoying me though. Well, I just have to make an adjustment. I'm gonna edit this last filter we made here on the sky because I can see it's too much. So I'm just gonna back it off a little bit. I'll make this 0.5 instead of 1. And then hopefully it works better. Cool. All right, so we were working on our sky. We just pulled down the highlights, and now we've got a little bit more detail in the clouds. Let's see what we can do about the image overall now, because I think I've fixed the problems I didn't like there. All right. Now we're going to go through this basic adjustment. Normally you do the basic adjustments first, but with this image, I saw things right off the bat that were annoying me. So I wanted to take care of them and sort of even out the photo before I started messing with it at all. So that's what we've done. Now we're going to look at these basic adjustments. So the basic adjustments are split into these modules. You have some tools that control lighting. So that's your exposure, contrast. Contrast is the difference between light and dark. Highlights, shadows, whites and blacks, right? So these are all things you control across the entire image. As I pull this up, it brightens the whole image. If I pull it down, you can see that the colors get a little bit more vibrant, but it's too dark. So let's just leave that where it was. The exposure was fine. Let's play with the contrast a little bit. Contrast is helpful because it can really help bring out the colors in something. So as I pull this contrast up, you can see that the darks get darker, right? And the lights get a little lighter. The difference between light and dark increases if I pull it to the right, and it decreases, and things get flat if I pull it to the left. See how that works? Now, in this particular image, when I pull that to the right, I'm starting to see more of the colors in the sky, and I like that. I don't want to push it too far. If I push it too far, it'll look cooked. So I'm going to hit it like maybe plus 20. And then like with any adjustment, we always want to check what it looked like before and what it looks like now. So I'm going to use my backslash key. Here's our before. This is our original. Here's what it looks like now. So I'm not seeing that big a difference with the contrast adjustment, so I'm going to bump it up a little bit more. One of the things about photo editing and graphic design is that you, after a while, or at any time really, you can't trust your eyes. You have to use tools because our eyes adjust to their surroundings, right? Depending on the ambient light in your room, if the sun's out, what angle you're viewing your monitor at, you'll see things differently. So we have some tools here that can help us make sure we're on the right track. One of those is just the before and after. That's super helpful. And then another one is this histogram up here in the top right. So let's make sure you can see that. In the top right, we have these wavy lines, and it looks a little bit confusing, but it's really not. What this histogram is showing us, it's a representation in a graph of all the information in this photo, and it's broken out by color. So you can see there's a lot of red in this photo. The red is here. You can see where in the spectrum from shadows to light all that red information is. So this is saying we got a lot of red in the darks because all this ground is kind of dark and it's red. And you can see down here, well, up here really, we have the blue wave. This blue wave is showing us the blue information in the sky. A lot of it's dark over here in the corner, so that's showing up in the shadows end of the spectrum. And then the lighter bits are showing up over here. So that's what the histogram does, and it can be very, very helpful because your eyes adapt to an image as you look at it. So you want to make sure that you're not fooling yourself. There's a bunch of tools here, and they're all well thought out for what we're doing. So make sure you familiarize yourself with them and what they do. All right, where are we at? We were just bumping the contrast. That brought out the colors a little bit. Let's bring the highlights down even more. So look what that's doing to the sky as I bring the brights down even more. Now we can see all this detail in the back here, these clouds. And that's cool. So let's pull these highlights down. We like that. And then the shadows is going to be the darker areas in the shadow. Let's see what happens if we bump the shadows up. Whoa. That's very dramatic. So that brings it brings the detail in all of this foreground stuff to the foreground. Right, let's look at a before and after. This is before. It's pretty flat. All of the light is up here in the sky, and it was dark out. It was probably 6 or 7 p.m. Now here we are. So we haven't even got to the color controls yet, but look at the difference in the color because of what we've done with the light and the contrast. So look at the sky. There's very little information in there. Now look at all that color and detail. That's just from adjusting the light. Very cool. Now let's play with our whites and blacks. So I'm going to pull my whites down and see what that does. It brings down, I see it mostly over here where the sun was going down. But it brings up the whites everywhere. I'm noticing it here in the cracks of this little path. The white bits of stucco or mortar or whatever that is are popping out as I adjust the whites. I'm going to bump them a little tiny bit to brighten up the photo, just so. And then let's before and after. I like it. I like where we're going with this. It's a better photo now so far. Let's see if we can go even further. Now we're at our blacks, and I want to show you a little trick with Lightroom. So if you hold the Alt key on your keyboard and click one of these, it has a different effect on the slider. So now as I pull down the slider holding the Alt key, it's showing me in black and white, basically, what is clipping. And by clipping, I mean what dark parts of the photo have got so dark that they're actually black and there's no information or detail in them anymore, and what parts of the photo have got so bright that they've turned white, like way up here, and there's no detail or information in those anymore. This is giving you a representation of that. I'm holding the Alt key on my keyboard, and as I pull this black slider down, you can see some little black speckles start to show up. That's showing me the areas of the photo that are completely black. So that's helpful. This can help us maximize the dynamic range of our image. And then by the dynamic range, I mean the spectrum, the amount of space between the darkest area and the lightest area. Right? If our blacks are really totally black and they can't get blacker than black, then we know we're at that lower end of the spectrum, right? So I just want to take this to where we're just getting a little tiny bit of black in the crevices around these rocks and stuff. That's where everything should be black, but we don't want to see any black like in the primary portion of our image, I guess. So let me hit Alt. See what I'm doing? I hope you can see it. I'm just moving this slider until there's just a few little speckles of black. Cool. Boom, boom, before and after. Awesome. There's one other tool here in our light module. It's this little tone curve button. Now to the right of the light module, there's this little S-looking thing. If you click on that, it brings up a tone curve option. It gives you some tips on how to use that. Now, the tone curve is basically adjusting the highlights and shadows of this histogram, right? So here's the highlights on the right end, and here's the darks on the low end. And you can see as I pull this up, watch what it does to the histogram above. As I pull the black point up, notice that all these lines up here in the histogram move to the right, because they're getting brighter. Right? We're moving black up, and that makes the photo look more flat. Now, if we take the other way and grab the rightmost point and pull it down, right, you can see what it's doing to the histogram. I just wanted to show you that this is here. Sometimes it can be a really quick way to make detailed adjustments in the color, in the light rather. So check this out. A lot of times people will make what they call an S-curve. They call it an S-curve because it kind of looks like an S. So I take this up, we take this down. It's messing with me. There we go. My points were messed up down here. So these little 3 points down here are showing you where along this line it's making its break. So I'm just moving these 3 little points so that they are on the right place. Just like so. And then I'm going to reset this because I've gone mad with it. And I can reset it by right-clicking on it with my mouse and then going to reset. And then let's pull this down. Damn it, I did the same thing. I want to pull my black point down more. Pull this up. All right. So I've made a slight little S-curve. I pulled my shadows down. I pushed my highlights up. This forms an S-curve, and see what it did to the image. So we can turn this on and off like so. You notice it mostly in the color. Right? And to me, I don't like how cooked it looks with this curve turned on. So I'm going to leave it off. I don't think we needed this. I just wanted to show it to you because this is one way that you can manipulate your image, right? So that's the light module. And I'm going to say we're done with the light module for now. We'll probably go back to it because photo editing is a lot of, make an adjustment here, go over and make an adjustment there. It changes the photo. Now we have to change something else. So we go back. You can spend as much or as little time going back and forth tweaking it as you want. Our basic light adjustments are done. Right? Before, after. Before, after. So we've done a great job in this module. Now let's move on to the color. In the color module, our first thing here is the white balance. We could change the white balance to, if it was daylight and we knew it was daylight, we could set that here. I'm leaving it to as shot. This is just going to keep whatever my camera set the white balance at. And then if I want to change anything about that white balance, I'll just use this temperature slider, right? This is where it had found its white balance. When I took the picture, it was at 5400. And if I move this to the right, you'll see my picture gets warmer, gets yellower or oranger. If I move it to the left, it gets bluer. So 5400 was where we started. Let's see what happens at like 6000. I'm going to just click over here where it says that number, and I'm going to type 6000. Boom. I kind of like what it did. It warmed up the picture even more. It was already warm, but now it's super warm. So we just warmed up the picture a little bit in the color. Then we have a tint slider that adjusts the balance between the greens and the magentas in the image. I almost never touch this. I think it looks weird and unnatural most of the time. I would only use it to fix a color problem if there was one. If there was like a green tint to a photo, maybe I would bump this a little bit away from green to kind of compensate for that. Now we have two interesting sliders. There's a vibrance and saturation. Let's talk about saturation first because I think it's easier. Saturation is just bumping the amount of color in the colors. So if you think of color, it has really three attributes. There's the color itself, the hue of the color. There's the saturation, or how much of that is being represented, and then there's the luminosity, or how bright the color is. Uh, this is controlling the saturation, the amount of color in the color. So you can see as I pump this, the colors get really funky looking, and they start to bleed into each other in a way that looks very fake, and I don't like it. I mean, this is art, so you can do whatever it is that you like, but I think this looks bad. So usually you want to stay subtle with the saturation and vibrance adjustments. Notice if I take this saturation slider all the way to the left, it's going to make our image black and white. That looks pretty cool. We're actually saying take all the color out of the color. But if I double click on this point, it goes back to 0 where we started, and let's just adjust it towards the right just a little bit. Just like plus 15 I'm going to do. And then we'll look at our before and after. So that's just made all of our colors a little bit more saturated, right? We can see a lot more of this green in the greenery, and I noticed it mostly. My eye was drawn to this area of the road right here for some reason. That's how saturation works. Now we skipped over vibrance. Vibrance is similar to that. Now Adobe has some kind of logic. It looks at your program material, your actual photo here, and analyzes the colors in them. And if you adjust the vibrance, it will adjust just some of those colors. It doesn't affect them all equally like saturation does. So this has a very interesting effect on different photos. It really depends on what your photo looks like to begin with. Let's see what it's doing here. It looks like it's bringing out more of the purple in the cloud here. And it's not touching so much of the red that there's a lot of in the image. It's trying to touch all the other colors. So I see it bringing out the yellow in here and the green in here, and it's pretty much leaving the red alone, which makes good sense. Let's just bump it by plus 9 because I like what it's doing. Overall, I like the way the image is starting to look. Cool. Before, after. It's just a better photo. Now, under these tools, we have the color mixer. Now, this lets you get granular and do specific adjustments to specific colors. So check this out. You can see all these little dots are the colors, and you can click on them to adjust each individual color. So we're on orange right now. If I pull saturation down, it takes out all the orange in the image, but it leaves everything else totally alone. You might like that, and your image might call for that. This one doesn't. Let's just leave orange where it is. There's plenty of orange, and we like it. So you can see under all these different colors that you can choose those 3 attributes that I explained to you earlier: hue, saturation, and luminance, and you can control them individually for each individual color in this Roy G. Biv situation here. All right, so what I'd like to adjust is the greens. I don't think we're seeing enough of these little shrubs and whatnot in the foreground. So I'm going to grab green, and let's pump the saturation of just the greens by some and see how that looks. And I'm seeing it mostly over here in the right corner. The greens, I guess, maybe aren't that green. Let's get rid of all the green and see what's left. Right? So all this color that's left over here in these bushes I thought was green, but it's not. It's probably some kind of, this. I don't know what color it is. So I'm going to mess with the saturation here of each of these colors until I find that one. What color is that? We know it's not green. I've turned all the green down, but that looks awful green to me. Is it blue? Ah, it's yellow. Look at that. I got faked out by green and yellow. So look at all the yellow in this photo. I wouldn't have thought that there was that much yellow in this, but boom. I guess we could have, if I took my own advice and looked at the histogram, I would have saw it right here. I wish this yellow was green. I don't like yellow as much as I like green. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pick yellow, and then I'm going to bump the saturation up a lot so it really stands out in the photo. And then I'm going to use this hue slider, and let's change the color of the color. So this is what I mean by changing the color of the color. Our color selected is yellow, and this is what we want to make our yellows look like. So I'm going to take it to the right, and our yellows get green. If I take it to the left, our yellows turn orange and red. So I'm just adjusting the color point of the color. It's pretty cool, right? So let's make our yellows here. Well, actually, I want to be careful because I just noticed what it's doing up here to the sky. Check that out as I adjust the yellows to green. That's not natural. You wouldn't see green in the sky. That doesn't make any sense. So I'm going to back off the saturation a little bit, and I'm going to back off my adjustment a little bit so that it's subtle, right? And I'm just bringing out a little bit. Well, I guess I'm not bringing it out. I'm manipulating it. I'm making all this green a little bit greener. Yep. Making all this yellow greener, rather. Cool. Now I'm going to come back here and fix the other colors. So let's put our other colors back. Just because we were messing with them. Yellow is the one we want to change. Green we might want to bump even more. And the rest of them, let's make sure they're all at 0. Boom. Here comes the sky. Do. All right. Ready? Before. After. So now we've adjusted our colors. Cool. And then if you want to see what just this color adjustment did, you can turn just this box of color adjustments on and off too. So it's really subtle. The only change we made is making all these. I can actually see it pretty clearly, but I don't think you will be able to. Making all these little bushes a little bit greener. Cool. Our next module here is called effects. There's a bunch of different stuff in effects that are cool. Everybody loves effects. What's not to love? We have texture. Texture is relatively new to Lightroom, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see better. Right, here's our bricks. Look what happens as I adjust the texture to the right. It brings out the texture, as you would think. Right? It's making all these little lines a little bit more defined. It's making the texture of this sand, or I suppose it's sand. It's making it really pop out and look a little bit more alive, a little bit less flat. And if we take it the other way, you can see, especially in the trail here, it really starts to blur out. It gets so blurry, actually, that it blurs into the other colors and makes like a haze effect. So as we pull this up, you can really see the cracks here. You can see all of this detail in the sand and in the rocks. As we pull it down, all that blurs out. So let's adjust our eyes for a second, put it back to 0, and I'm just going to blink a few times, make sure I'm sane. And then I'm going to adjust this to my liking. I'm just going to start nudging it up until I start to notice it doing something. Like right around here, 40, 30, 40. And then I'm going to zoom out and make sure that still looks cool. All right. So here's before, and here's our after. It's just making this look a little more alive, a little more real. Cool. Our next slider is called clarity. Let's see what happens as we adjust the clarity. Boom. Look at that. It's very similar to what the texture is doing, but it's not the same. This is also bringing out the details and things, but it's focusing more on the lines, like around these bricks. Look how defined it makes all the edges of things. That's what clarity does. If you take it the other way, it blurs out similarly to the texture. And if you take it to the right, it makes things a little bit sharper, kind of. I like it, but I want this to be subtle, so I'm just going to type in 10. Right? Just a little bit of clarity. It was a really sharp photo to begin with, so we didn't really need too much, but look at the difference. It's cool. Now, We have dehaze. Dehaze is a tool that was intended to help you get rid of like fog if you're shooting on a foggy day, or if you lived someplace like San Francisco where there is fog all the time. You wanted to shoot anyway. Dehaze is in there to help you shoot through that fog. So it takes the haziness away, or it can introduce some haziness. Let's see what happens. This photo itself is not hazy. There's no haze in this photo, but let's turn dehaze to the right anyway and see what happens. You note the brights get darker and the colors start jumping out even more. The contrast is expanded. Would contrast be expanded? I don't know. There's more contrast as you pull this dehaze slider up, and it pumps the colors in a kind of unnatural way. That's what dehaze does. If we go the other way, it makes it look like it's kind of cloudy or that it was foggy or bright. I'm just going to leave dehaze alone on this photo because it's not helping us, right? Just because we have all these tools doesn't mean we have to use them all. In these examples, I'm going through them just to show them to you. Next, we have in our effects module, vignette. And vignette is the vignette effect. So if I pull it to the left, it makes a black vignette around the corners. And if I pull it to the right, that's white. Now, I like vignettes a lot on most of my photos. I almost always put vignettes. So I'm going to put one on this photo. I'm going to make it -10 because that's all it needs. It helps draw your eye into the center of the photo a little, I think. So here's before and after. Before and after. Excellent. Next, we have a grain slider. As I pull the grain slider up, let's zoom in here. You can see what it does. It adds grain or noise, which gives it a film or vintage kind of effect. I'm going to leave the grain off because, I don't know. We pay a lot of money for these cameras. I don't want noise introduced. You know, I don't want it to be grainy. You might be different. You might like grain. I don't. I think grain's noise. Next, we have split toning. Split toning is kind of fun. Split toning lets us put color where it wasn't before. And it splits up the tones by the shadows and the highlights. So we get 2 points to adjust in the split toning section here. On the right side, we have a point, and we can put any of these colors into the highlights. So the highlights are the brightest areas of the photo. If I pull this up to, let's put some, well, I guess you can see pretty apparently what it does, right? I'm being very heavy-handed with it. But let's put some purple in the highlights. And you see that mostly in the sky because the highlights are mostly in the sky. And then I'm going to use this little button here, this turn off split toning, to do a before and after of just that one effect, right? I want to see what just this is doing to the photo. So turn it off, turn it back on, off, on. And it can be pretty dramatic, and you can do cool stuff with it. What do we want our sky to look like, though? Do we want it to be warm, or do we want it to be like purple? Yeah, that's cool. I'm going to put a little more red in the sky, actually. And turn off, on, off, on. I like it. I'm going to back it off even more. Backing it off. Now let's see what happens if I adjust that other point, the shadow point. In the shadow, we have a lot of red, so what happens if we put in some other color? It really has a huge effect on the overall tone of the image. You can make an image warm, or you can make an image cool. You can make it happy or dark and moody just by adding a little bit of color to the highlight and shadows. You don't have to add color to both either. You could add color to just the highlights or just the shadows if you were so inclined. I'm going to turn it off here. We could do cool, funky fantasy looking stuff, make this look like a different planet, but I don't know. I like the way it was. So I'm turning split toning off. And that's the end of our effects panel. And next we come to the detail panel. In detail, we have sharpening. Sharpening is, it's kind of like clarity. Let me see if I can show you real quick. There's always some sharpening applied by default to raw images because they don't get the same processing that a JPEG would in your camera. So when you take a picture with your camera, if it's set to JPEG, it does some of this stuff that we're doing in Lightroom manually. It just makes these decisions for you, right? It'll adjust your shadows, it'll adjust your highlights, and then it prints all that into the JPEG. In the RAW file, none of that happens. You just get the raw image that was taken, and now we're processing it ourselves by hand. So since the camera has not applied sharpening to the image, by default, Lightroom applies a little bit of sharpening. It's just helping us out. So by default, it's set to 40. Let's see what happens if I just crank that up. If we even notice a difference. What happens if I adjust the slider? I notice a huge difference. Well, I shouldn't say it's a huge difference, but it's very apparent. I notice a lot more details brought into all these broken bricks and stuff as I pull this up. Right? I can also see some of the noise, some of the grain in the photo more. It's accentuating that, and we don't want that. So what I'm going to do is that little trick I showed you with the black point earlier. If I hold my Alt key on my keyboard and then I click the sharpening, it makes the photo black and white so I can see what I'm doing better. And I can bring this to the point to just where it's helping the photo and not hurting it. And boom. It's just made it easier for me to see. So there's a lot of little secret things tucked into Lightroom that are helpful for your workflow. And it's useful to you to watch videos like this of me and other people like me doing this, so you can see their little tricks. That's how I learned it all. I didn't make any of these things up. Now, I've adjusted the sharpening here to 67 because I thought it looked good. Normally, when you're working on a photo, sharpening comes last. I would always come back to sharpening as the absolute last thing I do. I'm hitting it here just so we can go in order. Now, there's some other options here under sharpening. As you adjust this radius, it changes where the boundaries of the sharpening occur. I know that doesn't make sense, right? So what I'd like you to do is take this sharpening slider and go heavy with it. Like, pull the sharpening up a lot. Pull it up all the way even. And then grab this radius and adjust the radius and see what that does. Because it'll be easier for you to see it than for me to explain it to you. Right? When I bring this, I'm going to try to explain to you anyway. When I bring this radius up all the way to 3%, you'll notice that it's sharpening all these, it's sharpening these lines in the road, right here in the middle of the road. Let's turn this off and back on. Blurry, sharp in the road. That's where I'm noticing it. And as I turn that down, I start to see that sharpening affect more of these little lines in the bricks, which is interesting. So I'm going to set my sharpening here to where it looked good with the defaults, but I'm gonna bump it to about 60-70%. Okay. You'll have to play with sharpening. It takes a little bit to wrap your mind around what it's actually doing, but it's super helpful and it can make a big difference in the end result of your photos. So pay attention to sharpening. Noise reduction is next. Noise reduction allows us to blur out some of the detail in the noise. And by the detail in the noise, what I mean is this isn't a super noisy photo, but you can see some kind of grain inside the clouds here or any area you really zoom into. Let's see what happens as I adjust the noise reduction. It's tough to see on this image, but it gets rid of that grain. Actually, that looks pretty great. I don't need noise reduction on this image. I'm just noticing that it's not doing anything harmful. We'll play with noise reduction on a different image later and get more use out of it than we will on this image. Cool. And then that's basically our detail section. Right? So we've got sharpening, noise reduction, and then color noise reduction, which is similar to noise reduction. I'm just going to leave the noise reduction alone. Under our detail panel, moving on, we have optics. Now this is just a couple of check boxes for us. It's really easy. It gives us the option to remove chromatic aberration. chromatic aberration is like a flaw in the lens that you're using, that shows up as like fringing around the edges of things like trees and bushes and whatnot. It's safe to just click this. Lightroom will try and get rid of fringing chromatic aberration if it sees any. I've never noticed a difference on any photo with this checked on or checked off. It's up to you. The enable lens corrections box, though, I do see a difference with a lot. So if we click this, Adobe's worked with the lens manufacturers to come up with a profile of what the ideal lens should be, and it tries to compensate for any sort of manufacturing or physics type problems that we have in lens manufacturing by making adjustments in software after the fact. So if we click enable lens corrections, Lightroom finds a profile for the lens that I used, and it tries to apply things to make that picture look better. If I click that on, you can see that it removes some of the barrel distortion that was in this photo. Right? It stretches the edges out. It gets rid of the natural vignette that the lens introduced. But I like all that stuff. I like my lenses, and I like what my lenses do. In this photo and on most photos, I leave this off. Sorry, I scrolled with my mouse wheel off the picture. So you'll see that, yeah, that's what it does. I'm going to turn it off. I'm going to turn this chromatic aberration off in case maybe I'm colorblind. Maybe there's something here I don't see. I don't know. I've read about it a lot. I know what it is. I've seen examples in pictures, but I've never seen examples in my pictures. And then we have geometry. This module is for straightening lines, which is interesting, like in buildings and stuff. Let's see what it does. Let's just put this on auto and see what happens. See, it tried to straighten the line of the horizon, which is helpful. I didn't even realize it wasn't straight. If we turn this off, see the whole image kind of rotates a little. If we turn it on, Lightroom analyzes all the straight lines and tries to make sure that they're straight where they're supposed to be. One straight line in this image is the horizon. So look what happens to the horizon when we turn this on. I'm just going to set it to auto. Boom. Flattens out our horizon. Perfect. I didn't even know we needed to do that. Cool. We're learning. We're learning here. And then there's some other options under here I would encourage you to play with, see what they do. And that's that. So that's the end of our basic adjustments here, our color adjustments. Now, you'll notice there's a whole other suite of tools here. Now, towards the right, we have our crop tool. This is just for cropping our image. If we wanted to make it an 8x10 or 5x7 or whatever, you could crop to different aspect ratios here for your prints. So you can just select. You could either just grab a corner and make it the size you want, or you could say, I know I'm going to print this as an 8x10, so I want this to be cropped to an 8x10. And you see it gives you the image, but it crops to an 8x10. So if we were going to sell this, we'd probably crop it to right about here, right? I would anyway. Maybe not there. I want this. Let's go back to our crop tool. I got to fix that. I would do it this way. Just because my eye likes that better, the way that everything leads into the center better. I like it like right there. We have a healing brush tool. This brush is for fixing like blemishes, zits, things like that, or removing things in a photo. We don't need that here. We're not going to use it. We have a brush tool, which allows us to select things by painting over them. We're not going to use that here. Then we have our tools here that we used right in the beginning. We have our linear gradient tool that we use to adjust the foreground in the sky. And then we have our radial gradient tool that we use to adjust the light over here on this little guy. Now, that's all of the adjustments here. If I hit before and after, this is what our photo began its life as. And after an hour of messing with it in Lightroom, this is what it looks like. Right? So you can spend as much or as little time going through each photo that you take, adjusting them, or just focus on the ones that you love the most. It's up to you. The more you use the tools, though, the better you're going to get them. which makes good sense. So now that we're done with our photo, we probably want to do something with it, right? We'll have to put it on Instagram or Facebook or show the world how great we are. So to do that, we have this little share menu. Just make this full screen. Probably should have done that in the beginning. If we click on the share menu up here, it looks like, I don't know, the default share menu in lots of apps. Now it's just went wacky on me. Maybe full screen was a bad idea. All right, so I'm going to click the share menu, and I get some options for exporting my photo. We can export a small JPEG, and by small, they don't really mean it's not super small. It's small, like suitable for use on social media. That would generally be what you were going to use, is a small JPEG. Or a large JPEG, and you would use a large JPEG maybe for print. For our purposes, let's hit up the share menu, and we're gonna hit export JPEG small. All right, and now it brings up this export dialog. Where do you want to save your photo? Let's just put it on the desktop. Where's my desktop? And we'll call this. We'll just put it there, right on the desktop. Now you'll see here's our photo right over here on the desktop. Now we could take this and we could put it in Facebook, or we could send it to our phone, email it to ourselves, whatever it is we want to do. There's some other options in here. If you wanted to change the quality settings of the exports, you can do that. And that's the end of our first image. So I hope that you were able to follow along there. We're going to take a break. And when we come back from the break, we're going to work on, well, I'll ask you, we can work on Zoe here and do a portrait. She's a great model. Or we could fix this really dark picture of the Grand Canyon that is basically black. I think we could salvage this photo and turn it into something. So say in the comments which photo you'd like to work on, and when we come back from the break, we will work on that photo. I will see you shortly. And we are back, or we should be back, but I see an issue here. My camera's not working anymore. Oh, let's fix that. Can't have that, can we? Oh man, we might be hosed. Might have to stop and restart. All right. Well, you might just lose my smiling face, or I may just have to adjust this camera. Look at that. The show must go on. Very cool. So you can't see my hands anymore. Oh well. We're gonna turn off that other camera that's not working. Because it's not working. Alright. Boom. Let's get rid of that. And then let's get back into the world of Lightroom. Here we go. All right. Welcome back to Lightroom. Now, I did not see any choice here, so we're gonna work on this picture of the Grand Canyon because I think this is common. Right? We were shooting directly into the sun, so obviously the camera couldn't handle that dynamic range all in one image like this. Well, or could it, right? So let's bring this photo into Lightroom. If you are following along with us, there's a Dropbox link that has the photos in it, so you can grab those and follow along with us in Lightroom. Import this photo. It's the one we're working on. In Lightroom CC, Let's start this photo in the basic module where you would normally start a photo. Let's take a look at our histogram. It's the first thing. We can see that, for one, both of these little marks up at the top are illuminated. That's showing us that shadows are clipped. If I hover over it, it tells you the shadows are clipped. That means that they were so dark that there's not any information there to be recovered, right? There's nothing we can do. They're going to be black. And then over here, it says the highlights are clipped. Click to see where in the photo. If we click that, it shows us this is clipped. This is actually white, right? So there's no detail there. Let's do it on the other one. Let's see where it's clipped. This is where there's black. See where it's all illuminating blue? This is the portions of the image that are flat black, and we're probably not going to be able to save them. That's okay. Most of the image is fine though. Look, so if we turn on everything that's clipped, it's only a little bit, so not a big deal. Let's start here in the light module. So the light module is the first module we've got, and our first slider is exposure. So let's just start pulling the exposure up so we can see what we're working with. I'm going to way overdo it just to see what's in the photo that, like, what are we working with? So if I pull the exposure all the way up, I mean, I would never use this image, but look at all that detail. Like, so we definitely know there's something going on in here to be recovered. Let's bump the exposure back down to something more reasonable, so where we just start to see some stuff. I'm going to bring it up to like here, so I can just start to faintly see that there's some lines and valleys and there's some details in there. It's bringing me into the photo a little bit more. Awesome. Contrast. Let's see what that does in this photo. If I pull it up, it's making the sky brighter, and it's making the darks darker. We don't want to make the darks darker because they're really dark. We want to make the darks lighter. If I bring the contrast the other way, look at that. Well, now it's adding some light into those areas that were previously dark. So already I've touched 2 sliders in Lightroom, right? I touched the first 2 sliders in Lightroom. This was before, and this is after. Right, but we're not going to stop there. That's not how we roll. We got all these other sliders to play with, right? So let's see what happens if I pull the highlights down. In most photos, if you pull the highlights down, it's going to bring some detail into the sky. Let's see what happens. Pull it down. Whoa, look at that. That's a lot cooler, right? It's definitely a lot moodier. We can start to see some of the the star that the lens made, or I don't know if that was actually beams from the star or a flare from the lens. Whatever it is cool, right? So we like that. Pulling the highlights down brings that out. Let's bring them back. Can't really see the sun. It's just a blob of white. Pull it down. I mean, there's our clipped area that Lightroom warned us about. This is white. We can't do much about that. But that's okay. It still looks cool. All right. And that's the highlights. I'm going to pull them all the way down because it's my image and I can be as heavy-handed with it as I want. The next slider here is our shadows. I think the shadows are going to help us out a lot. Let's see what happens if I bump the shadows up. Well, brings out all this detail under here that was previously lost. So let's look at our before and after now. Before we have black, and now we have this amazing canyon with like landslides going on. And I don't know why this is black. That's weird. I'm not sure what that is. So it's annoying me, whatever that black mark is. So what we're going to do is take this little Band-Aid, this little healing brush, and grab that, and I'm just going to paint over that little black spot, and boom, no more little black spot. Let's get back to work, shall we? All right. We were at the shadows. Now I'm going to do that little trick I showed you with the Alt key on the whites. So I'm going to hold Alt, and then I'm going to click on the whites, and I'm going to bring them up until I start to see. We know about this spot, right? I'm not going to worry about this being blown out. So I'm going to bring up the whites until I start to see some clipping. That's as far as the whites can go before we start to lose information. And then I'm going to do that same thing with the blacks. I'm going to hold the Alt key. I'm going to bring these blacks down. And it's okay for there to be some black in this image. I don't want the whole thing. I don't want it to be super black, but down here was pretty dark. All right, let's look at it before and an after. Before, after. Before, after. Cool. You know what? After I did that a few times, I kind of liked the way that the sun was all blown out like this before. Now it looks a little bit like, I don't know, affected, maybe. So I'm just going to go to my other adjustments and back them off a little bit. Probably this highlights one. Yeah, that was it. So I'm not going to pull it all the way down. I'm going to pull it down to -66. That looks a lot more natural to me. Okay. Cool. So this is a, okay, basic tone curve. We could grab our curves adjustments here and just play with them and see what that does. All right. Let's turn this on and off, see if I'm helping or hurting. I would say that I am hurting, so I'm going to turn it off. Let's see what we can do with the color. Now we have our temperature slider. Let's see what happens if we make this image warmer. If we make it warmer, that looks pretty cool. It's kind of gold rushy. I mean, if we take it to the extreme, it's extreme, but that's okay. It can be extreme. That looks cool. I kind of like it. So, I don't know. Maybe we crank that. Let's go back to what it was. So this was really early in the morning. I think I had stayed up that night doing Milky Way stuff, and this was the morning after. So this is all blue hour light. That's why there's so much kind of blue going on in here. It was really early in the morning. If we take it the other way, I mean, that looks cool too, but I like it warmer. I think it looks cooler if this was sunset instead of sunrise. Right? So here's where we were. This is what the image looked like before, and now this is where we're at. Cool, that's taken us 15 minutes of actual work. Let's just adjust the tint slider and see what that does. Let's pull it to the right, and we get what we would expect. There's some purples coming in, and it looks all right. We go the other way, and I kind of like that too. It's bringing out some green down here in the foreground, but I don't know if we want this green. I don't think I like the green in this photo, so let's leave the tint where it was. I like that. Now let's play with the vibrance, right? The next slider down is our vibrance slider, and if you remember from the last photo, this is going to adjust the saturation of just some of our colors, right? So as I pull this, it's really adjusting the yellows, and I think it's trying to leave the reds alone. And if we go the other way, it pulls out the yellows. And if I go far with it, it'll get the reds too, but yeah, that's what it's doing. It's mostly affecting the reds and the yellows. I'm gonna bump it to +15, because I said. And then let's see our saturation here. Let's see. I don't like it if we push the saturation, because now the sun's starting to look really fake. It's accentuating this flare, and I don't like that. So let's leave the saturation where it was. The color is kind of fine here. And before, after. Awesome. Do we want to do anything in our color mixer? Maybe. Let's take a look at those greens I said we didn't want. Maybe let's see what happens if I pull the greens out. Honestly, I don't notice a difference, so I'm just going to leave that alone. Let's see what we can do with our effects. What's texture do for us? If I pull up the texture, whoa. I'm going to zoom in. I'm not sure if you can see that, but it really brings out details. I mean, there's a lot of noise in this photo, but there's also a lot of details. There's a lot of rocks falling and stuff. Let's see what happens. This is no texture. Let's pull the texture up. Boom. You can start to see the definition in this little landslide and stuff. And if we zoom out, you don't notice the noise really, because there's a lot of information going on in this photo. The noise is just a little piece of that. But we don't have to turn it all the way up to 100 either. Let's just bump it a little bit, because I like the way that it's bringing attention to these little landslides that are a really cool part of the image. Next, let's play with the clarity. Ooh. Now look at that. So what the clarity is doing, what I'm noticing it do anyway, is it's really bringing out the lens flare here. And it's bringing out this band of, I don't know if it's white. It's making the distinction of this this band here pop out more. So as I bring out the clarity, it's making those whites whiter. And I like that. So let's zoom out. Turn my clarity down. And now I'm going to bump it up to about 60. Now, almost every adjustment that we've made to this particular photo has been really, really, really heavy. Usually photos can't take the heat like this one can, but this one can, and some of them can. And over time, you'll be able to notice which ones can and which ones can't. Really, the trick is when you're first looking at the photo, if it's dark and you think it could be cool, just jack the exposure up all the way and look at what's in the photo and see if it's worth trying to recover anything. That's how I learned that there was even information in this photo to recover, because look where we started. I could have just thrown this out. This isn't, I mean, it's all right, the silhouette or whatever, but I didn't even know that there was this much information in the photo until after I started playing with it. So next on our list of tools here is a dehaze slider. This photo does actually look kind of hazy. Well, I don't know if it was hazy. We were in the desert, but it was definitely early. Let's see what happens if I pull dehaze up. Ugh. Yuck. Yuck-a-doodle. We don't like this at all. Look at what it's done to this. I don't even know how to describe this heinous atrocity. Oh no, yeah, I don't blame it. Lightroom just almost crashed because this is so horrible. I don't blame it at all. So what was that we did? Let's undo that immediately. That was bad. That was dehaze. So let's see if we just crank it a little bit. Even just a little bit of dehaze is making the line around this mountain. I'm sure this thing has a famous name. This is probably a pretty famous place, right? I don't remember what it's called though. It's making this line look awful, so let's get rid of it. What if we go the other way? If we go the other way, it's kind of cool. It actually kind of saturates, or it brings some of the other things together, maybe? I don't know. It's making the sun come out. I'm leaving dehaze alone. We don't need it. The photo's cool enough without it, and I don't trust it either way. Now we come to vignette. I like vignettes, so let's vignette this. You know what? You know what this photo needs? This photo would be better. This would be a better photo if it was an 8x10. So let's crop it. Up here, to the right of the toolbar here, or all the way to the right, is my crop tool. You could use the C key on your keyboard, or you can click on the crop tool. And in aspect ratio here, let's drop this down and select an aspect ratio of 4:5. So 4:5 is the aspect ratio for an 8x10. Right? If you multiply 4/2, you get 8. If you multiply 5/2, you get 10. That, ladies and gentlemen, is math. I bet you didn't know you were going to get math here too. Yep, you are. So now we cropped this photo, and I think it's already way better because of that crop. Right? There's less dead information. And before, after. Awesome. Then we have grain. We definitely don't need to put any grain in this photo, but I'll show you what it does. It makes it look like a crumpled piece of paper, which could be what you're going for. It's almost never what I'm going for. Then we have split toning, which allows us to put color into the shadows or the highlights where there was no color before. Let's play around there because that can sometimes be fun. Let's grab the shadows this time. We'll start with the shadows. So I'm going to start with maybe some blue teal colors. See what that looks like. Orange and teal is a very good color combination. You see that a lot in cinema. So it's familiar to us, orange and teal. We see it lots of times a day. So I do want to put some teal in here. Not a lot, but just a hint of color. So it's got some interest to it outside just being a cool mountainy range thing. Let's play with our vignette a little bit more now that we've got a crop going on. I'm not even gonna vignette it. I think it looks worse with the vignette. While I was looking at the corners up here to see what the vignette was doing though, I noticed a couple of spots on this image. And what this is dust. So you see these little black spots in the sky. This is because my lens was dirty when I took this photo. And if you take a photo at a high enough aperture, like at f/22 or something like that, I don't know let's see what I was at here. Probably at I was at f/20. So yeah, I was really stopped down there. It makes that really apparent. So to fix it, let's click on our healing brush here, and we have this little circular cursor thing. And I'm going to use the bracket keys on my keyboard to make that bigger or smaller. So my right bracket makes my brush there bigger, and the left one makes it smaller. So I'm going to make it just about the size of these specks of dust, and then I'm just going to go bloop, bloop. Sound effects are free, folks. Bloop. Bloop. And now we have no more dust, so our dust problem is gone. Yay. All right, so before, after. All right, very cool. What's next? We didn't play with the highlight split toning. Let's see if we can put some color into the sun. The sky. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Oh. I mean, there's a lot of red in this photo already, but I don't know. More red seems like the way to go here. All these colors look cool, and there isn't a wrong one, but I don't know. I like the Martian red, kind of. It's all Star Trek-y. I think they'd filmed Star Trek around here actually back in the day. One of these Red Rock areas. All right, that's our effects panel, and we've come a long way here. Next, we've got our detail, which is our sharpening, noise reduction, and color noise. I'm going to leave this detail section. Let's just come back to it in a bit. I'm going to skip detail for now. We'll do it last because I actually like this image, and I'm going to edit it the way I normally would edit a photo. Let's look at what our optics corrections do for us. I click on remove chromatic aberration. It's just fun to say. And then enable lens corrections. And see what the lens correction's doing is pulling out the edges of the image to correct this distortion that was happening, this kind of barrely distortion that was happening from me using what I'm assuming was a pretty wide lens. If I hit I on my keyboard, it brings up the information about the photo, and up here it tells me everything about it, like what camera I took it with and what lens I was using. So I was using a 28-75, and I was at 50 millimeters, so I wasn't even super wide, but there is a fair bit of distortion in this because it's a wide angle zoom lens. Of course there's distortion in it. So this is fixing that distortion. I usually like it. I do like it. You know what? I like it better with the distortion than without. So I'm going to leave that off. And then in geometry, if you remember, this is the module that straightens our lines for us. In one of these workshops, we'll work on a building, and I'll really be able to show you how cool this tool can be. But let's just see what it does. I'm just going to put it on auto. So where it says upright, I'm going to change it from off to auto, and it tries to straighten this horizon a little bit. But see what it did? It turned the photo on its canvas. And it did that because in order to straighten this line, it had to rotate the photo. And if you think about rotating a photo, you might rotate it off your canvas or off your desk. So Lightroom provides us with this little checkbox here to crop the photo after it's done the adjustment. So let's see what happens when I turn that on. It just cleans up that overflow. So, boom, this is where we were, this is where we are. And in this case, on this photo, I think that straightening this horizon has made the more important part of the image, which is this, askew, right? So I'm going to just undo those changes because I don't like it. Don't like it at all. That's better. So I would rather have this straight than the horizon be straight in this image. Every image is different. So you can't apply what worked to the image before. Very good. Very good. Let's see. Next, I said we were going to come back to the details. So let's click on detail and then adjust our noise reduction. Let's do noise reduction first because there's a lot of noise in this image. We pushed it really, really far. I mean, we were excessive with this one. So if we zoom in, you can see there's a real lot of grain. And as I adjust this noise reduction slider up, you can see that grain starts to just disappear. Right, there's a point though, if I push it too far, where all the detail in this landslide and stuff disappears with the grain. So the noise reduction is a balance between getting rid of the grain and keeping the details that you want. So I usually go pretty easy with it. Also, noise reduction is very CPU intensive. It's hard on your computer. That's why I recommend that you do it last, because if your computer slows down, it's harder to do all these other adjustments, and then you get frustrated, and then it's not fun, and then you quit. So this is just a workflow tip. Do the noise reduction last. And then we'll apply some sharpening to try and bring back some of the details we may have lost in applying the noise reduction. So I'm just pulling up the slider here. I'm going to zoom in so I can see what it's doing. And really, I don't see it helping us much. All I see it bringing my attention to is the noise that was in the photo that we just tried to get rid of with the noise reduction. So I'm not going to sharpen it any more than it is. I think the sharpening's hurting this photo. And that's where we're at. That's probably where I'd end messing with this photo. I might take some more time, like I might grab this linear gradient filter and maybe try, ooh, not that. I clicked a little too low. And so I'm going to drag this linear gradient here. Actually, not from the bottom. Let's see if we can get a little more love in the sky. Whoop. So my linear gradient tool, here it is. I'm going to delete that one and just make a new one. Here we go. Let's pull it down the sky. Boom. Now, let's adjust this exposure. You'll see it's only affecting the area where I had that gradient. We're not trying to affect the exposure. I'm just seeing what is possible. If there's anything more I can do to this dull-ish part of the sky and this kind of blown out-ish part. I'm not sure if there's much. But I'm playing with it. I'm playing around. If I pull the shadows up, it makes a little haze around here. I like the shadows up, actually. So that did help. Let's see what this does for us. Well, there is one option in here that we haven't explored yet, and it's all the way at the bottom of one of these selective adjustments. If you're using the linear gradient or the radial gradient or the brush tool to make a selective adjustment, then you have this option to turn on a color. And that's kind of like the split toning, but it allows you to add one color. Right, so I'm just adding a color that was not in the picture to make it look a little bit more interesting. And it's got to be a purpley kind of bluish. Yeah, there we go. A nice little purple. A nice hat. Ooh, Ooh, I'm going to hit Control Z to undo what I just did there. Yeah, there we go. And now before and after. That's the end of this image. Now, we're going to switch gears. It's 11:30. We're going to take another break. And then when we come back, we're going to move into the wacky world of Photoshop. And we're going to do that cool dispersion effect where somebody kind of blows apart. So stick around for that. If you don't have Photoshop, you could still apply the same things we're going to do to any sort of graphics program. Like if you use Affinity or Procreate or Corel Draw, or I know any of them really, you should be able to use these same techniques to come up with the same effect. So don't fret if you don't have Photoshop. If you want Photoshop, it's like $10 a month or something like that. So that comes with Lightroom and Photoshop. It's not that expensive, and this is pretty good software. I mean, the photography deal from Adobe, I think, is not unreasonable. But that being said, we're going to switch off to another break. When we come back, we're going to move into Photoshop.